Anatomic by Adam Dickinson. Read by Ken Hunt. For Ruby, Millicent, and Marigold, with every microgram of my being. Anatomic. The keys touch me when I type. My breath smells because other creatures live out their ends in my mouth. Wearing a waterproof jacket perverts my immune response. My throat is sore because of a miniature life form that, when magnified, looks like a string of pearls. My neighbor's attempt to control dandelions leads to misspellings in my adrenal gland. In my lower intestine, E. coli reproduces, making vitamin K and assisting with undigested carbohydrates. My fat collects signatures from one of the most profitable companies in the world. In necessary ways and in toxic ways. The outside doctors the inside. This is evolutionary history, and this is a metabolic response to the energy technologies of my historical moment. Petrochemicals brand hormonal messages that course through endocrine pathways and drive my metabolism. I wear multinational companies in my flesh. But I also wear symbiotic and parasitic relationships with countless non-humans who insist, for their own reasons, on making me human. I want to know the stories of these chemicals, metals, and organisms that compose me. I am an event, a site, within which the industrial powers and evolutionary pressures of my time come to write. I am a spectacular and horrifying crowd. How can I read me? How can I write me? I collect my blood, urine, sweat, and feces. I send them to laboratories to determine the levels and types of chemicals and microbes I find. I get tested for hundreds of substances that fall under the following groups: phthalates, dioxin-like chemicals, PCBs, PFCs, OCPFs, PAHs, PBDES, HBCDs, parabens, BPA, triclosan, additional pesticides, and 28 heavy metals. I also tune in to the signal of my microbiome by swabbing various areas of my body for bacteria: hand, genitals, ear, nose, and mouth. I obtain a deep metagenome and virome characterization of a stool sample, plus additional marker gene sequencing, 16S RNA, 18S RNA, and ITS, to characterize not just the bacteria, but also the viruses, microbial eukaryotes, and fungi in my gut. I have some initial difficulty sending this sample across the border. I am a spectacular and horrifying assemblage. I resemble a battery. I wear uranium from well water in the Canadian Shield and from the nuclear testing that marks me as a child of the Cold War. I house bacterial colonies that have become empires of the Western diet, fueled by sugar, salt, and fat. I summon the energy to write by way of a metabolism already written. What is inscribed in me is in you, too. Hormone. A few individuals together constitute a crowd. 3 ppm of bromine, 500 ppm of benzene, 5 milligrams of arsenic, 500 colony-forming units per milliliter of tap water. In the sexual parts of material history, every belief has its crowd, every crowd its medium. Some crowds are slow and wander the wilderness. It's not always the remoteness of the goal or the splendor of the pilgrims. Some include every member they've ever had and ever will have. One lifetime reaches into the next like a sleeve. Some crowds accumulate in the reproductive organs of their maxims. Casseroles, tea, die-ins at the strip mall constituency office. Fruit stand vendor on fire. The crowd is an accumulation of what cannot get out of the way. Herd animals were hunted for food, but also for the feeling their numbers gave the hunters. Let there be more of us, they prayed, and envied the buffalo meat that built railroads and fueled wagon trails. Their hair was stuffed into furniture, shit burned for heat. Every nation feels it is promised the whole earth. Every nation sits atop a pile and waits. Adam, in order to test your body for the range of chemicals you've requested, you will need to send in approximately 62 milliliters of serum, equivalent to about 150 milliliters of whole blood, and approximately 6 milliliters of urine. Both the urine and serum should be sent in amber glass jars and cooled to below 4 degrees Celsius. Using the morning void would be best. There are no other restrictions besides making sure that the serum sample does not contain or come into contact with any Teflon. Agents orange, yellow, and red. You are either for chlorine or for the plague. Right now is the cleanest we have ever been. And for this, you must love aerial defoliants, or you love communism. Under the bandage of this one industry town closing ranks around staples of forestry and fish, the wound is wide-eyed and headstrong. Through the clearing, freshwater carp blink past the graves of missionaries who introduced them to the New World. Northern rivers are warmed by the paper mill's piss, which, like making the world safe for democracy, slowly leaked into my childhood, yellowing the lipophilic paperbacks of my adipose fat. You are pulp for poverty. You respect the Constitution, or you stare at the ground lost in bankruptcies for herring gull beaks, or blurred embryos in cormorant colonies. Every erected media platform reduces the problem of war to a problem of tint. During the Orange Revolution, Viktor Yushchenko was poisoned by government agents who haywired his food with dioxin. His face flared into pages of acne. You are either for the red or the white blood cells, for the tops of trees or the bottoms. I filled 76 vials of blood. The centrifuge I used would take only small tubes, which is why I needed so many. My veins were a mess. I took short breaks to walk around the room swinging my hands. By the end of it, I was drawing from both arms and yanking on the tourniquet with my teeth. My generous assistant was not a trained phlebotomist. We did it during his free time at the university. The university eventually found out what we had done. New policies were put in place. Fruit belt. My wife and I cough differently. She leans into her sleeve, encouraging replacement leaders. I am less sanguine about stems and must cover my mouth during toasts. She is shade tolerant and takes her asthma for a run in ravines ravaged by dog-eared understories. I cough to test my inguinal narratives for spring on automated blossom bearded with hair triggers. She coughs at the same time as applause, sensitive to the seedless struggle for dominance that defines our clingstone generation. I blow out birthday candles on other people's cakes. She is generous to a fault, and cuts to the chase with a cocktail sword, hands on her hips, like the last native variety pulled up by free trade. Post-nasal, I reverse into parking spaces, wiping out the element of surprise. Dry and persistent, she encrypts her skin with moisturizers. Cacophony is inflammation. The residue of every suppressant we've ever tried keeps bucking within us like a bronchus. We listen at night for the croup of air guns keeping the migratory birds from the orchards. Our girls sleep through it in the room next door. Hormone. Fire in a crowded theater is constrained by free speech. The more easily a thing burns, the less it can defend itself from freedom. Each person sees the door through which they may freely pass. Frames punish their pictures. The same flames give different versions of resistance, but the more one has to say, the more one is captive to the ovens, joining together what was separate in the shortest possible time. Animals flee the freedom of the forest for the burning streets. The arsonist lives alone with the freely associated details of a confession. Suppressed in one place, it rises in another, the enemy of free spirits. There is no escaping the free world. It surrounds us like an aspirin in a drink. When it seems crowded with fire, the trampling that accompanies panic is just the urge to stomp it out. It looked like I was going to have to shit in Buffalo. I needed to send a stool sample across the border, and it would be easier to simply go to Buffalo, produce what needed to be produced, and send it from there. Problem was that it appeared I was going to need a significant amount, more than one sitting, and I would have to freeze it. I wasn't holding out much hope for a hotel room with a deep freezer. I weighed my options. Strange to spend a weekend in Buffalo with the sole purpose of collecting and mailing my poop. In the end, the paperwork came through, and I carefully placed everything to harden in our basement freezer. Galactic acid. For the first 2 years of my life, my mother's vaginal flora lived in my stomach. Consigned to the edge of their star system, they ate everything I ate, fermenting chains of starch into acids that fed the high energy demands of trying to erect an antenna. The flora flexed for deep space, convinced they weren't alone. They transmitted their contractions and hoped to reach aliens before the terrible facsimiles of the 1970s. Humans drawn without sex organs and burdened by messages whose content had become instructions for reading. Set amidst this mucosa, a gram-stained parabolic reflector waited for word from newcomers. We're a lot alike, my mother and I. Our disdain for underachieving campsites, and the way we signal for help by maintaining a slight underbite during awkward conversations. Her vagina made me cosmopolitan, a dialectic crowned in the forest. Its many antlers have since come to crowd my self-possession with spent velvet. I watched my mother favor her disintegrating hips. The small party that left her for the New World founded a settlement on a moon she still tracks without looking. Its tidal pull on the pit of her stomach makes her pause at the zenith of a phone call. What is it? Hormone. Anxiety waits for a table under a cave painting. Water stirred with a spear. Keeping it together is a form of digestion, and digestion is a form of commitment to the dignity of letting it go. One part of you, as an act of survival, starts eating another part. This is a membranous decision in which the crowd, having mistaken its periphery, resembles its prey. It was unbearable to see the possum lying there. You asked me to drive the car over its head. Hope is such a strange evolutionary adaptation. What selective pressures must have been its shepherd? What drinking glass with an envelope placed over the top, carrying a spider outside? Against the occupations and desertions, against the bodies tied to trees and the flags partitioning the wind above them, against the accumulated wealth that acquires a house with an aquarium big enough to require its own diver, against the magical idea of refined sugars and depictions of capital concentrating on its breathing. There's this hopeful monster. You breastfed the survivor with coded plans for escape. The signal slips through undetected, like the possum and its adaptive capacity to convincingly die. Mouthfeel. The tongue map is wrong. There are buds down to the Commonwealth. What was the bliss point of African blood is the table sugars of Europe. Every year, spinach produces a sugar in its leaves comparable to the world's annual output of iron ore. Without hurting the taste, a young child can stand to keep a hand in cold water longer with a sweet mouth. The faster starch converts to Christianity, the quicker each outreach over police radios. Oh, my sweet tooth, my oatmeal raisin, my poison-tipped candy apple cart. Pleasure from food is the air waving goodbye in heat, distorted like an inherited empire. In this way, we are closest to people who touch what we eat. Captives of loneliness stare into icing. I know enough about the cherry on top to lick around the sides. I had to keep a food diary before obtaining my stool sample. I had never paid such close attention to what I ate before. The word made flesh of a sweet potato. The onion domes of Russia in the garlic bulb's imperial fiber. All those calories packed into a few grams of butter, a bowl of pasta. All those calories knitted into the harvesting and flatbeds sewn delicately into the crop dusts and mists that make them inhospitable to the insects and fungi that are their first and most desirous admirers. If I ate less, I would limit the PCBs, pesticides, and metals that could get in. Right? This idea consumes me. Integrated pest management. It is enzyme hour. Front lawns part their hair, waiting for instructions. Fat kids run through sprinklers with shirts on over grass growing shapelessly in the deciduous forests of the large intestine. With mid-century Manichaeism, many a man has lusted after Wrigley Field, its preemptive stripes against the perennial apologists for divided cells. Be alive to your inner bowling green, its role in the spread of the horse, the wheel, and the post-war laboratory limb. Grass climbs out of the limbic system into changing climates of sex, hunger, offspring care. Play outside, my mother scolded. I was fertilized by early cultivars of pasteurized milk and river muck yolking my hands with ventilated eagle eggs. We hate the insects. We hate them under the street lights with their primitive foreshadows. Our solution is perfectly safe. When people try to commit suicide by drinking it, they fail regularly. When the results start to arrive, I felt tense. The door was about to open into a mailroom filled with incommunicable antibodies strung from a bare wire. I read them quickly, not wanting to let my eyes linger on anything alarming. When I come across a chemical that measured among the top percentiles, I panicked. I felt sick. Cortisol dropped. Death comes like a letter that folds its recipients. Fat is an organ. It echoes with music and memory. Fat is a slowly oscillating wave. It embodies the constancy of transition, clinging as a perpetually updated fuel reserve, an accumulation expressing through hourglasses, pears, and apples the energy balance of a life being lived. Fat is a metaphysics conditioning experiences of reality. It regulates hormones and directs the transitional modalities of metabolic processes. Fat provides stability, padding, and insulation to equip a body in transition, moving through climates and calories, catastrophes and capitalism. Fat feeds us, but Western-style commerce has afflicted many parts of the world with obesity. Children are filled with accelerated derivatives of excavated sunlight and profitably supply-chained processed foods. Fat is an archive of the historical moment. Military, industrial, and agricultural history bioaccumulate in adipose tissues. I have found one of the most widely distributed environmental contaminants on the planet in my body. Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. Principally manufactured by Monsanto for industrial and commercial applications, these lipophilic pollutants collect like comment sections in the fat of creatures everywhere. If we test for them, we will find them. PCBs constitute a form of writing in the Anthropocene, a recursive script where industrial innovations find their way back into the metabolic messaging systems of the biological bodies that have created them. As edits, as subtle revisions to the hormonal cascades that precipitate bodily morphologies and affective experiences of the world, PCBs are messengers in the fat of our humanity. Lipids. Angular arches, inwardly curved. Short final stroke compulsively avoids responsibility. Open top, stabbed. 2 parts hypocrisy, tight-fisted, loops in the oval. Deceptive. Wide, wakefully streaked. Selfish with hands inhibited by persistent tapering at reversal. Watchful and hooked. Start with secretive sharp tongues, selfish figures arc or claw. Whether right or wrong, emphatically squared, avaricious finish at the double knot gossip close, wide wakefully streaked, selfish with hands inhibited by persistent tapering at reversal, split stem, whip-like, long bar mimicry, self-protective pressures disloyal. Open top, stabbed, 2 parts hypocrisy, tight-fisted, loops in the oval, deceptive. When my mother's breasts were building my brain, her milk sent me a postcard from the post-war boom. The message was scrambled, proprietary. Wind-borne elsewhere's outfall spikes, face-swirled factories with disjunctive hair loss, heat-waved skin, malignant neoplasms of indefinite dose. Headquartered in the subtext were inscrutable companies conflicted with interest, like urban forests or chlorine, sending people to work under crumbling narrative arcs. Smoothing their loose leaf, they made us believe we were victims of atmosphere. My jaw owes its plot lines to my mother's breasts, even as they're ghost-written by power grids redesigning sensoria from a diaspora of unseasonal thunderheads. In a world that persists on bottles of cabin pressure, her milk beaded my lips with formulas. Prefatory baby fat, fatal. Milk fat, infatuate, fatigue. Fat lip, butter fat check. Fatuous forefathers kill the fatted calf. Fat as a beached whale, fat as a pig. The fat lady sings. Chew the fat, fatherland. Fatwa. Fat chance, fatalist, fat fuck. Indefatigable fatuity. The fat is in the fire. Unfathomed, blood fat. Fat of the land. Before entering the zone, the writer, the professor, and their guide fell asleep beside a river. The surface of the water was obese with lather. Waves slurred beneath a heavy blanket while a strong wind picked at the fire-extinguished foam. Tarkovsky filmed Stalker here, near Tallinn, Estonia. A chemical plant emptied its effluent just upstream, near a half-functioning hydroelectric station. Allergic reactions climbed the faces of the crew. Tarkovsky, his wife Larissa, and actor Anatoly Solzhenitsyn all died from cancer of the right bronchial tube. Adhesives and tapes arrive. Bushings arrive. Cable insulation sets foot. Capacitors set foot. Carbonless copy paper, muscles caulking muscles. Cork breaks in electromagnetic break in felt worms. Fiberglass worms floor finish creeps. Fluorescent light ballasts creep. Foam insulates. Hydraulic oil insulates. Motor oil colonizes. Oil-based paint colonizes. Plastics horn. Switches horn. Transformers leak. Transformers leak. In Amjiwinang First Nation, only a third of all babies are boys. The hockey team has disbanded. Girls' softball was added. Refineries rim the community with pipes. cholera, smallpox, the British, and the French split piles of young Anishinabek men. In unseeded lipidscapes, offspring now flare with feedback. Injuries take their course like conclusions draw baths. Boilerplates rust in jurisdictional prudence. On the back of the old $10 bill, the picture of smokestacks and holding tanks could only have been taken by standing on the reserve. I called to ask. The real star is the food. It's attached to every period theme, slicing through herbivores and spinach dip with the heartburn of a meteor. Trenchant and toothsome, huge platters of fowl. The taste excuses representational behavior, but every crater in the mouth is a landing pad for the unmanned messianism of hormones. It's so obvious. In the face and neck, the choice means more often superior. Nostalgia for the first bite of prepared predator. Heat hangs sentimentally in the electrical grid's unpublished correspondence, abbreviated by unreliable litters of pack ice. Feel the taste of it. What makes them so attractive makes them hard to destroy. My gut is a tropical forest of microbes. Their cells, which cover my entire body, are at least as numerous as my own. These microbiota live on and within me as a giant non-human organ, controlling the expression of genes and the imagined sense of self, maintained by my immune system's sensitivity to inside and outside. It is unclear, in fact, whether the immune system controls the microbes or the microbes control the immune system. My body is a spaceship designed to optimize the proliferation and growth of its microbial cosmonauts. These organisms enact a form of biochemical writing through their integral involvement in the metabolic processes that fuel my life. In some cases, the proliferation of certain species can improve the health of the host. The oligosaccharides in honey, for example, which are indigestible to humans, can stimulate the growth of bifidobacteria in my gut, potentially reducing the risk of food allergies and colonization by pathogens. The enzyme beta-fructofuroside from Bifidobacterium longum is one such catalyst for handling the oligosaccharides from honey in the anaerobic environment of my large intestine. Shotgun called it. Saliva is disorganized and easily fooled by success. It's not even true that I eat honey. Within the province of drive-thrus and sleeper cells, something else does it for me. Stuffing aspartame briefcases with municipal snow. At the business end of this shit, complex sugars are abducted by aliens necktied in a carpool, still rocking classic haircuts and metabolic pathways from the oxygen-starved oceans of Archean Earth. I don't have to move a muscle. Bifidobacteria break down the best defense, and special teams build welfare states and a culture of dependence. Also found in hamster dental plaque, Mongolian fermented horse cream, pig intestines, and honeybee digestive tracts. The limits of my enzymes mean the limits of my world. Milk and honey, curd a landscape as pointless as a fingerprint. In the prehistory of the gut, getting off this planet means getting someone else to take the wheel. Commensalism. Amber shared a wing. It was in her mouth. She had killed a bird and laid part of it on our steps. Amber was a St. Bernard crossed with a ridgeback crossed with a switchblade. Her prey drive always circled several times before lying down. Mice, moles, rabbits. She rifled through their bodies like evidence, delivering them to us as wilted envelopes through the information services of her soft-faced mouth. We got her after one of my dad's friends joined the military. She roamed the neighborhood like a keyboard. Dogs wandered as fluently as children through the folk songs of a parenting style in which helicopters had long since left the embassy rooftops. We never tied her up. Mr. Langston didn't want her on his property. Mr. Langston was a prospector and he wasn't home very often, but when he was, he lived between our houses like a boulder. His huge traveling packs were filled with salted pork, axes, and dynamite. We could see the fuses. He had been dropped into our world by a glacier from another century. Cobalt, uranium, nickel, and gold. Mr. Langston lived alone. His only companion was a cat, whose fur was abandoning its body. It crept about with the nudity of a washed hand. Our young lives, conversely, were crowded with insurgent flags like autumn leaves in a storm drain. We had insatiable appetites for the internal provinces of absorption. Every scrape we acquired was an opportunity to peel another scab, to pull back the blankets and watch the wound bed dream. We crowded into Mr. Langston's loneliness with our freehand markets, peddling improbable stories about caves full of gold leaf guarded by bears with fangs like liberty spikes. My friend Luke said we should sneak into his house. You could tell when Luke was serious because he'd start licking his lips, and they'd shine back at you when he was talking. Mr. Langston's house was known to us only in the brief moments when we accompanied our parents to drop off food or hold the door as they helped him through the prism of holiday drinks. Sometimes the drinks made him chase us. We were warned to stay off his property. He kicked me once so hard and so surprisingly I nearly bit through my lip. For days I ran my tongue over the contour of the wound rhythmically and obsessively. It took a long time to heal. We stopped cutting across his lawn. Instead, we used the street with its rooster-tailed stones. Inside his house was the inside of an idea, whose minerals were as obscure to us as the geodes posing vaginally by the wood stove, their crystals glistening inward. Clocks ticked with the wrong times. Windows were shaded with the climatological stratus of cigarette smoke. His house smelled like someone had been bankrolling soil, floating its reclamation mission with unambiguous faith. It was obvious that the man ate nothing but dirt. That's how you looked for metals. You had to eat the dirt to know what was in it. It didn't take long for us to find the bucket. Some things take longer than others to appear. But we were always on the lookout for outlines, stains, relief, for swellings amidst no obvious injury. Like Amber, who in broad daylight once attacked the moving wheels of my dad's truck. An ambush we respected, if only for its resolute commitment to the interiority of a circulatory system similarly beyond our reach. Under the sink, beside the vinegar and empty wine bottles with corks jammed back into their necks, was a giant plastic bucket. It was enormous, the kind of pail used to haul field-dressed deer parts or brimmed with salt at the curbside crosswalks in town. It looked like the kind of bucket my mom had me fill with ashes from the furnace to take out to the compost. If there was snow, I usually set the bucket down without emptying it and let it melt its way to the ground. We thought it was pine pitch or chicken fat, but it was honey. Deep, almost burnt amber. It consumed every calorie of the stark kitchen light. Prehistoric insects, with their arms folded, were preserved in its depths. A few cat hairs were spider-legged on top. He kept honey in the subatomic loneliness of his mid-latitude bungalow. We cupped it with our fingers and then our hands. Our faces glistened. Strands of it returned to Earth on trajectories mathematically determined by our rolled-back eyes. We crammed it into our mouths with slurred speech. The strange moonlight reflected from the planetary face of a defenseless animal on its back, barely breathing as we ate its entrails. The plasma glistened on our lips. In retrospect, how could he not return to find us there? We were populists imposing our assembled convictions on the conspicuous eccentric. We were vigilantes storming the castle in the name of nothing but burlesque. Such indiscretions inevitably receive the face of their target the way the crowd moves through the streets only to become the streets themselves, scraping glass loose from storefronts, awakened. When we heard him at the door and finally saw him, we tried to make it out the back, but our legs barely moved. He stood there with his hands apart. His mouth was open, but he didn't say anything. He smelled like dirt to us, like an overturned rock, revealing its clandestine cities of spiders and earthworms, collaborating all this time on an elaborate resistance to the world as we know it. We drained from his house like syrup and collapsed on the safe side of the property line. My mother shrieked as she came outside. She had her arms bent at the elbows and her fingers spread like she did when she was handling meat. "Oh my God," she said, "you better go home." Not long after we were made to apologize, I saw Mr. Langston in his yard chopping wood. Each piece stood before him in the form of a confession. They all ended the same way. He paused for a moment to look over at me when something caught his attention. Amber was in the bushes at the back of his property, her body hovering, snapping branches as she twisted. Before I could call her, she emerged. Mr. Langston stared at her. I waited for him to lift his axe, but he stood there like a piece of his own wood. She bounded toward me with something in her mouth. She dropped the limp cat at my feet. His hairlessness was shocking. Here was a body whose skin was hunting down and killing its own coat, follicle by follicle. It made me shiver not to think of it. Hormone. The unconscious is structured like a hormone. The ideas of the past are already quorum, sensing the ideas that will replace them. A hormone conjugates its subject. First, a stimulus. It could be glucose in the blood. It could be the pervasive, uncontrollable fear of being poisoned. A sequence of events is set in motion. Insulin is produced to handle sugar. Sugar is made available to the blood. Either way, I'm taking a deep dive into my own bodily fluids and trying to read them. But the pool is an empty helmet. My magnified blood cells. My dark mirror stage. Hormone. At the center of every crowd is a ladder, Both criminal and hero ascend into fugitive impulses long civilized out of any one individual, but kept alive in the deforming action of an obsessive thought. A glitter path forms in the red end of its parent light. Slogans share mouths with rivers and jars. There is never a time we are not being fed. I'm wearing a striped shirt. I'm at the back by the railing. If you see me, it is because the crowd has already left the party and is now stoning the host. I am standing on stones. OCD. We ran into the police escort east of Nipigon. Cars sat undigested along the roadside. He jogged toward us on his prosthetic leg, part hop, part kite, part fire escape. His fists were clenched and his elbows locked, carrying a stack of dictionaries to safety before a speechless crowd stunned in the broken wrist of a rock cut. Nobody said a word. Engines idled while his footsteps type-faced the center line. Silence swallowed its spit. The cancer had come back. Everyone was crying in the simplest sugars, so nothing made it beyond a single mouth before falling apart. A 4-year-old girl with a big grin finally shouted, "Hi, Terry!" It was the only sound for 1,000 kilometers. "Hi," he said back softly to my sister. Sweat squinted from his body, looking out at us from the liquid crystal of his guts. For months afterwards, I obsessively practiced his gait. I held my fists before me and pulled my body as a sequence of events over shifting centers of gravity. How does one life live inside another? When does it try to get out? I started scrutinizing my body. I watched it for abridged exit rows. My right eye was tear-shade, tired of eating. I tested each morsel for numbness. I performed ritualistic experiments on my sense of cumulative contour. Tired, walking the center lines of roads, clover-leafed with anti-vaxxer headlights belittling my eyesight. Headed off to see the head-ons. I was the mademoiselle of the gazelles. I slurred my words, saying this alone in a dark legume. The Count. It got late in my rib cage, and birds landed to pick my brain out of the clamshell takeouts sexed with houseflies. The guy who brings his own lamp to the archives is not fucking around. The guy who finds his archive filled with lamps is terrified of his burglarized flesh. The lights were on the whole time. Circulation. If they worked together, the microbes could eat us in a few days. Our bodies would blacken, liquefy, and run into the streets. I keep thinking I can feel them, and so I wash my hands of their stop-motion pawns. Anxiety is a form of autoimmunity. You can't be trusted with your own intentions. I wash my hands, and then I think to wash my hands. This is an attempt at silence. Sterile palms hold forth with little more than the hardiest staff. I am on the windward side of a dialectic built from idiolects and sweat. Take me to the firewood, to live with the trees. I began to make excuses for walking. I walked everywhere, even where I had nowhere to go. Some days I would walk over 20 kilometers. I know because I started keeping track. I felt calm when I was walking. The anxiety temporarily diminished. I sensed the functional reality of exertion, my metabolism burning calories into heat, sending smoke puffing out of the slacked chimney of my mouth. I wasn't dying when I was breathing this heavily. In and out. Nothing stayed for long. I wasn't anywhere. A cloud. It turns out the starting material for the earliest forms of life is a carcinogen. Hash with a dime in a beer bottle. Burning defines me like froth at the corkscrew of an argument over the illusion of safety. My compulsions are all monuments to incomplete combustion, by which I mean particulate matters, comprise my unmanned willingness for nerve endings. I wear smoke immunologically, like a barrel with suspenders or well-heeled neighborhoods with street associations taking care of quiet boulevards like cottage country lakes. Suspended in the water column, fish hearts, slow to the length of time it takes the marinade to soak in. Diesel rigs run all night at the truck stop diner, amidst the alphabetic disparity between benzene rings and highway signs, buckshot by glitched up guano. Hitchhikers may be escaped inmates. Things make sense more easily if they are attached to moods. Every night I replay the half-baked getaway of a running nose, trying out cigarettes and accelerants or cuts of meat. I lost about 18 kilograms of weight. This meant I had to buy new clothes. I was determined to starve the chemicals out of my fat and deprive the microbes of their sugar highs. I was feeling like shit and took it out on the people closest to me. Hormone. We are on our way to the hospital to free the germs. As with any siege, partisans beg to be let in. As long as the traitor is quiet, the crowd lets him eat and drink and make love. Unless a sense of justice can weigh its own compromise, it will eventually succumb to its scales. Some of us are standing in the water feature, evolving out of the situation. Kidneys rinse and fold their blood supplies. Glucose sits poised like a mallet over glass. My tests tell me I have a lower capacity for breaking down certain large branched sugars. This can promote infection, but I also have a lower gene count for endotoxin, which may mean less inflammation. All I hear is infection. I feel stuffed to the brim. I am breathing only at the very end of each breath. Anxiety is taxidermy animated by the insides of something else's guts. A string of small pearls. Now we are in the throat. Necks are the hardest animal parts to scale. We are in the throat, disingenuous, with the nighttime sleeping arrangements for ulcers. Now we are in the throat, as the caterpillar and butterfly parent completely partitioned worlds. We prick light on a throat. Culture of entitlement, remarkable for its moth-eaten tonsillar birthright. Hospitals are being infected by their inhabitants' throats. We are in the throat, throwing the security forces off our scent. Insurrection is metabolism practiced with spit. We are in the throat, sharing the same spoon. Hormone. Beyond the social forces that influence them, crowds are guided by their dead. They off-gas from synthetic furniture in hotel rooms with the low-amplitude hum of a spaceship idling in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. The outside world has been destroyed, and watercolor sailing regattas are the new spores. My children occupy the campground with their unfinished bodies. I should be relaxing, but I'm a circus tent soft-served with vertigo. The sunshine is sliced to pieces on the handlebars and spiral slides. Is it possible to say that in fucking me up, the chemicals exalt me? Vanadium? Manganese? What the hell? How much exhaust have I been sucking? The people of Grassy don't have a mercury problem. They have a drinking problem. They were no longer themselves, and there was talk of making a national park to solve the problem. This kind of talk was part of the problem, where the problem people are spread onto maps and folded into animal shapes on long car trips through the wilderness. There was talk of the problem, in a few arms and legs that couldn't talk, and so folded in on each other and clenched on to something no one could see, which seemed heartbreaking and unnecessary, but was a way of signaling that the problem was all around us, that the problem could be touched. And when touched, it would grab back like the rapids in that river. There was talk that the waters were not polluted. And if they were polluted, then the company was not responsible. There was talk that nothing escaped from the plant, and if anything did escape, the company did not know it was harmful. There was talk that bodies were not actually poisoned, and if they were poisoned, it was because of what goes on into them. The weekends in Kenora, the altered dream states that break into leaf in this culture. But culture, urine, and vomit in the streets of that culture. There was talk that they couldn't hold their liquor. As if liquor were a front door you could hold open for a crowd pouring in to pound your liquor. The fur trade was in there, burning in a shooter. There was talk about how drinking was one long, peristaltic protest against colonialism, an attempt to clear the throat as perfectly good protein threw itself into rivers through car windshields. Some people went on talking, like this. And here, I have it in my blood, talking. A settler, methylated by the privilege afforded by the problem's extremities, shaking with poorly connected dreams. All this talking, and I am beginning to repeat myself. I'm a white male. My body is marked by certain demographic privileges. It is true that racism and economic marginalization can cause people to live in closer proximity to industrial pollution. It is also true that privilege with its associated dietary and hygiene opportunities can lead to a less diverse microbiome and increased incidence of gut infections. This is especially true on a global scale, where citizens of disadvantaged regions often have much more diverse microbiomes and fewer immune-related illnesses than their wealthier neighbors. The chemicals and microbial signatures may be different for distinct communities of people, but the chemicals and microbes are in us all. A minor excretory organ. It's easy to feel detached, but it's easy to eat someone else's stray hair in a salad. This is globalization. You can raise a glass of water to adulthood, confident you've done everything right, but still, the companies are counting on us to love that part of ourselves that is them. One way to solve a complicated problem is to endure a smaller version of the same problem. The carousel was sourced from Toronto's Sunnyside Park, but Disney wanted only galloping horses, so their legs were broken and the horses refitted. Collections of baby teeth were started in 1958 to measure levels of strontium-90 in people living near nuclear plants. When the king gave a single strand of hair or let his hair be touched, his courtiers knew he had just paid them his most valued compliment. I became competitive with myself over caloric deficits. 500, 1,000, 1,500. It was hard to concentrate some days, and I was sure I was slurring my words. I asked other people if they noticed anything. I didn't believe them if they hadn't. I had to stop reading Ben Lerner's 1004 because it made me feel I was at risk of an impending aortic dissection. I was dizzy. I felt tingling in my arms and legs and was sent for an MRI. I underwent a colonoscopy after complaining of digestive problems. There was a complication with the procedure, and a week later, after a poetry reading, I went back to the hotel room and shat a toilet bowl full of blood. I was in the hospital for 2 days and anemic for many months. Sometimes even walking couldn't quiet the obsessive thoughts. The doors I locked and locked again opened behind my back. When I was a kid, one of my testicles went up inside my body for a while. I became convinced this was the result of my exposure to chemicals. The chemical tests had put my body under surveillance. But it was watching me watch it. I was living my life like a splinter being slowly driven into my own skin. By all means, sure, certainly, absolutely. The actor who played the gravedigger was my friend's father. After his parents split, we'd cut class to deal stud in his mother's basement. My first time voting was in the Charlottetown referendum, a constitutional bedskirt hung out to dry like poorly laundered regionalism. When my father's friend showed up at the polling station without ID, I vouched for him, though I wondered why he'd driven there without a license. During the summer, I piled wood at the mill, filled orders, and hid behind the hemlock lifts by the river smoking menthols. He would show up occasionally in a small dented pickup looking for plywood and strapping. The community theater was building one last set before the festival went underwater. Deficit hawks were dive bombing the new vanishing points of civil expediency, and I started to believe that the pits of Ontario peaches had arsenic in them. As it turns out, 100 grams of peach seed contains 88 milligrams of cyanide. The arsenic was in the pressure-treated lumber I cut and stacked every day. The sawdust smelled of a fresh deck of cards. It hung in the air near the radial arm saw like a biography unable to hold a narrative coherence. Like a dream protecting sleep by making everything familiar. There are no safe levels of any of the chemicals I was tested for. What's a safe level? What's an adverse effect? Industry welcomes the imposition of guidelines because this would give them permission to pollute people up to a line with impunity. Our bodies are adaptive. But in adapting, they change, and those changes can affect the ability to undertake other functions. People have widely varying sensitivities. A small additional change can push someone over a tipping point to sickness, even if many others are not measurably harmed. What's a safe level? What's an adverse effect? Northern Planning Mills. Doug kept a wedge of Limburger cheese in the rafters of the saw shed. He liked the smell of feet. Mark shot a bear and brought the roasted meat for lunch. He'd been to jail for 60 days after trying to steal a lawnmower. His drunken slow-motion getaway from the Rental on Main Street was a nightcap turned tranquilizer dart, and was on the 3rd page of the local newspaper. After I went back to school in the fall, Mark showed up at my house late one afternoon in tears. He couldn't think straight. He said, "Nobody gets me." Hopelessness is a transition metal in mammals. Wayne was our boss and sat high in the forklift all day moving pallets of cedar and fir and spruce. He teased Mark, and Mark took it like mucus. Diesel smoke belched from the forklift stack like after-dinner farts at the hunt camp. "Don't be such a fag," was the one staple isotope of the yard. Anne was Ojibwe and didn't take shit for many of them. But there was a lot of shit. Doug's cheese smelled like it. It was my job to keep a lookout for customers. We'd drink in the saw shed and give each other advice on how not to be assholes. Wayne's forklift idled just outside the door. The fumes sunk their metals in our blood like coins into a meter. Hormone. Corn is so obedient it can't conceive, resisting a forest, internalizing grass. When cut, it's a death as equal as a Union town. Its towers over its masters, like a haircut killed midway between abilities to straighten itself. One person, one vote. Keep off the grass, and let the markets open the genial tracts of frogs. One country, one flag. A chicken in every pot, and a car in every applause. Doesn't take much to make the corn admit to everything. Monsanto built an empire laying eggs in heirlooms. All the acorns have old-timers' disease. I can't say a word you are saying. Corn dogs bark through the night. Gut-brain axis. We punk-rocked our brains out that summer. What happens in the vagus nerve never stays in the vagus nerve. Each gig fattened in my head until the fleshy part was a pamphleteer pacing dietary fiber for grassroots. I think of you in my hippocampus college, finger-picking through memory stacks, setting neuron fires for warmth, like the first time I burned down a carb load eating asteroid ice at the axon of a guitar lick. Since then, new instruments come easily with prefrontal abandon, while the alien abductions I faked to lure you back are band shells of their former selves. Perfect recall is really a spotlight into an energy drink to acrylic for reproduction. Come watch renal lobes filter copyright infringements. Ladies and gentlemen, I call this piece probiotic. I know it like the back of a bottle of Molotov cocktail, like I know the military invented teenagers with baby booms. Smash the state! Smash it to bits! Take it home in a headache. Walking was becoming its own form of dependence. I would pretend I wasn't going even when I was. If I had a large meal, I would walk late that night after everyone else was in bed, over the surface of a world whose merchandise circulates within my cellular respiration. Each exhale, I was injuring the air. I didn't consent to carrying these chemicals inside of me. I walked until I couldn't see stars. Outside, inside. Hormones have their own poetics. Secreted into the circulatory system in response to chemical signals, hormones write to distinct organs. Their task is the prosody of metabolism. Cellular rhythms harvest enough energy from food and air to fuel digestion, reproduction, growth, and the general health of a body. This book of glands and hormones makes up the endocrine system, an enduring evolutionary adaptation that has changed little in millions of years. Estrogen and its receptors are ancient, having continued for eons to perform important functions in all vertebrates, and even in some insects. The hormone and its receptor fit together like a head into hands, or a hack into a password. The emergence of petrochemicals in the Anthropocene has coincided with the proliferation of endocrine-disrupting chemicals. These hormonal mimics, present in many common consumer products, are mistaken for keys to cellular locks, altering the body's hormonal chemistry. Phytoestrogens, abundant in many of the plants we eat, are also estrogen mimics. However, they are familiar antagonists in the long history of evolution. They are a defense mechanism against grazing. Plant estrogens lack the unprecedented potency of emerging chemicals such as phthalates. Phthalates are in everything, from personal care products, medicinal devices, and food packaging to children's toys, air fresheners, and building materials. They are added to plastics to make them soft and pliable, to cosmetics as a lubricant and penetrant, and to fragrances and other scented products to increase the longevity of smells. The characteristic and desirable new car smell is composed in part of phthalates, off-gassing from plastic finishes. As estrogen mimics, phthalates can adversely affect the development of the reproductive system in mammals. They have been linked to infertility, lowered sperm counts, various reproductive tract malformations, asthma, obesity, and cancer, among other toxic effects. Disruptors. The softness of phthalates is the softness of squeeze toys, pacifiers, and laboratory tubes. It's the softness of euphemisms, eating dandelions by the roots. The radio smell of bug spray is as soft as a shower curtain taped to a car's missing window. Rules are made by those who enforce them. Soft power sits at the table like a soft drink. Soft wood from balsa trees is preferred for tables and chairs designed to splinter on stage in the theater. During intermission, those who don't want to be there, having come to please someone, to smooth something over, smoke outside on the steps. They pretend to read calendars on their cigarette packs. The softness of phthalates is the softness of transparent packaging crumpled in a fist. When released, it springs outward from memory. Sense, 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 sense. Sight, 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 sight. Metal, 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 metal. Rose, 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 rose. Right, 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 right. The young men are laughing as they enjoy having the bodies of men. At the hotel pool bar, they pollinate each other with urine containing microscopic pieces of their own skeletons. Free testosterone circulates within them like motor oil, making rainbows in the heads of parking spaces. They are not women. Say otherwise and they will fight you. They will fight you wearing aftershave and cologne. They will come at you through moose and gear shifts, steering wheels and air fresheners, through fragrances, hair gels, and blood bags. They will advance on you through stabilized rubbers and resins, including nitrocellulose and polyvinyl acetates, soft gloves, jelly vibrators, and PVC pants. They will take you through slow dermal exposure, through their corresponding monoesters in the gastrointestinal tract, through excreted metabolites in their piss. They will kick your ass through androgen receptors and blocked endogenous hormones causing urogenital malformations. They will fight you, and they will shout down testicular dysgenesis, down hypospadias, down cryptotorchidism. They will be sweating now, and you will hardly recognize them, holding their limp bathing towels as industry lobbyists try to rally fishermen against chemical bans by telling them they will lose their flexible worms. The young men are glistening with sweat that comes out of them like browsing history. The things they touch them back, leaving small oil slicks inside that throw up color wheels in the signals to their glands. They are not women. They will fight you. They believe this with the narrative authority of an intravenous drip. The key in pink eye and hand, in merchandise and tongue, in cheek and screw, in bolt and butter, in scotch and coffee, in cups and dinner, in the bell and periods, in the reasons enumerated for failure, in the fly's field of vision, in the width of the web, and the tick in the sweat gland, horses in the power, and the guest in the host, and the knock at the door, and the grammar of the dancing reproductive success, of the bee in the pollen, and the allergen's revolt, deciding inside from out, and the shout in the rooftop, and the drift in the gene, and the spray that comes in from the crops, and the air in the vent, and the vent in the small hours after damage has been spent, and weeping in the willow, and empire in the fiddle, and Balkan in the powder, and dark horses in the running, and the absence of questions in the wandering lust, and the fire in the pine cone, and the halo by virtues of passion in the fruits, with substrates in the enzyme, and penis in vagina, and the hetero in normativity's reflexive complementarity, and floor tiles in the embryo, and raincoats in the testicles, and the call in the response, and the response in the mouth that makes the call. Under pressure to be fearless, the male brain sweats in a jar. The two halves are drawing different conclusions. How are other people feeling? The male brain thumbs tacks. Having been doused in an embryo at the buzzer, the male brain wanders into problems with a backpack full of explosives. Every night, a pilot light schools its flagellant arms race, annealing metals in its dismounted police. Having bravely stood in a javelin rain, the male brain turns down a blow dryer on a friend's stream of pee. Though it will never admit to this, the male brain is tense that its tense is the future perfect. What will have been the means by which it means? It squats in its skull like a cork. I will not let go of your hand. No, I will not let go of your hand. No matter what, I've got you. Feel my hand. I've got you. Phthalates light small scented candles for explorers who have just arrived on this peninsula and are now inquiring after its name. The locals tell them they don't understand the question. The visitors repeat, "We do not understand the question," with great difficulty, pronouncing each word. "We do not understand the question," they say over and over, lifting the backs of their tongues. At the meal held in their honor, the newcomers propose a toast. "We do not understand the question," they declare, and point to the coast, their arms encircling the air above their heads, the backlit clouds, the smell of food and candles. We do not understand the question. Grasses defend themselves. Succulents defend themselves. In an ordinary field, spines and thorns. Foraged plants defend themselves. Tannins, terpenes, alkaloids, difficulty ripping and swallowing. Shrubs have molecules dedicated to bitterness. Some spike dead stems to stop grazing. Some suppress fertility in animals that feed on them. Estrogen mimics in phenolic rings. Beet, barley, sunflower, rapeseed defend themselves. Greeks and Romans ate pine and pomegranate to prevent pregnancy. Wheat, sage, alfalfa, clover, soybean, garlic, and hollyhock defend themselves. Estradiol in the pill, phytoestrogens in apples, bluegrass, oats, cherries, rice, and rye. Plants defend themselves. Dead plants defend themselves, rearranged into plastics. Estrogens in air fresheners, shower curtains, detergents, cosmetics. Estrogens in water bottles, flame retardants, children's toys. Money. Estrogens coat hands holding receipts. Estrogens accumulate like sensible heat. Date palm, rhubarb, willow defend themselves. Plum, potato, parsley defend themselves. Coffees defend themselves with contraceptives. In the beans, in the Mesozoic algae, in the disposable cup. Cardboard coconut hanging from a string in real estate agent's unventilated office. Pine tree in the cab of a half-ton, humid with takeout. Little rose bouquet in a burned-out bathroom off the meeting rooms for a climate change conference in Medicine Hat. Try to place the chemically manufactured smell of fruits and flowers, and you find yourself on a debris flow into the uncanny valley. Like the creepy There's a knife missing smile of those alert, oversized vinyl dolls for children. Synthetic mango is an overly macheted smell, too rigidly insistent on narrowly defined versions of vacation sex and culturally appropriated tropical breezes. Aloe blossom is almost certainly an assassination attempt. It never succeeds, of course, because it emanates too much performance anxiety, gives away the game by forgetting to flick its ash. Pumpkin spice is like hugging your grandmother, inhaling deeply, only to feel some of the stuffing emerge from the crease in her neck. Real fruit. Its handwritten notes, soaked with sweat and read by the light of a flesh wound. They announce depth of desire, ripeness to act, and cultivated memories built out of carefully lit sugars. Synthetic fragrances barely recall anything except our untimely deaths at the hands of uninformed interiors in which every recollection becomes a plastic spoon wearing a mouthful of canned laughter. They appear in our cells like crayons, misshapen and melted in the seat of a car parked in the sun. Hormone. For many centuries, the crowd concerned itself with the crowd-sized world. It eventually made it to the moon and looked back. A different kettle of fish appeared stranded between sexes. Identities are performed and configured according to the reiterative power of bottles to produce shrunken, captured ships. You might not think that you do this, but you do. A young Bill Clinton waited in line until the very last minute before lifting his hand. Forced to take a step forward, President Kennedy faced him squarely through the crowd of American Legion boys. Alexei Leonov used his strong grip to bleed air from a distended spacesuit. Having crash-landed soon after in the Siberian snow, he hid from wolves in the broken capsule for 2 nights, emerging to greet his rescuers with hands warmed in his crotch. Jean Chrétien practiced the Shawinigan handshake on the throats of hecklers. The night of the second Quebec referendum, I was pushed against him on a Parliament Hill. His gloved hand made my eyes water with its vinegar stink. When Kim Jong-il shook your hand, you knew you were loved. He practiced strenuously, injecting members of his staff with painkillers. All available photographic evidence suggests Margaret Thatcher offered Nelson Mandela a boiled sparrow shortly after his release from prison. When it's cold, I wipe blood on other people. A jackknife folded into my thumb years ago, camping. I was carving a whistle, cleaning myself in the lake. Leeches arrived as lips jawlessly pursing in the digital weeds. Winters. The wound opens its fly, dry skin splitting along the scar seam, blood spotting my grip like electoral ink. The unfinished whistle appears with its primitive signal, the subconscious urge among people who shake hands to bring those shaken hands to their noses and mouths, to smell them. Hormone. A crowd with little fingers coming out of a stem. They're fine. My suitcases are normal scores. One supporter got up and said, "You have strong clouds. You have good-sized bolts." And another would say, "You have a great surge." I had no idea. I thought you were deformed. I thought you had small cattle. I mean, people were writing. How are his droves? My clusters are fine. You know, my bottlenecks are normal. Slightly large, actually. But I did this because everybody was saying to me, "Oh, your parties are very nice. They're normal." But one of the things he said was, "You have a small community and therefore a small something else." There are so many baskets that nobody writes about. It's incredible. Adam, cancer has an endpoint. Generally, there are many or different endpoints associated with any given compound. Because most of the compounds are found in the vast majority of the general populace, it's important that the participant understand what they are being tested for and are tested with appropriate medicinal supervision. We will ask that you have this in place before supporting your project. Scale. My daughter was throwing food on the floor. I turned her high chair to face the wall. This wasn't something I had done before, and its perfunctory execution seemed strangely pedestrian. As she whined and complained, I was bothered by her segmented attempts to turn around, her raised hands swimming, soft-boiled. She was an overturned beetle, a turtle on its neck. Her incapacity was disturbing to me. I was on a balcony with no railing above a plaza fueled by the secretionary courage of executive force. A proscenium-framed, humid antechambers of questionable decisions in which cultivated attributes were bandaged and dressed for work. My greatest fear is to be helpless, vulnerable, incommensurably scaled to my torment. I gave her the plastic water bottle she loves, the one with the princess's exaggerated eyes. Hormone. Commands spread horizontally in a crowd, like a dream surviving the difficulty of imagining how anyone survives being asleep. I don't recognize myself in the deadpans of the deeds I have done. The bite marks are blurry, and the wound is swollen with parts of me that have given their lives. Pure as angels, their heaven is hot to the touch. My stomach aches with indoor exercise, adapting itself to the walls that compound it. Interstitially we wait for you, O Lord. A command does not end when it is fulfilled, but remains stored forever in the children surrendered to the venial sense of how right we are. The fight against flight is the hypnagogic origin of swelling. The fluid is very clear on this point. Heterotrophies. Hunger is always gamed by quorum sensing. Enough cup holders eat drive-thrus. Enough drive-thrus eat long suburban commutes. Shift work eats the microflora that eat your lunch. Out west, the highways are grass-fed, and the Alberta Advantage is one way of learning to feel a gingival recession. At the community center, overfed bodies heave overboard into glittering tap water. Table sugar accumulates and must be cleared from the streets. Like commemorative plaques from our centenary cakes, once the pleasure centers are discovered, we leave the stove on for entire forests and stop brushing. Some foods make us even hungrier. It makes sense that the germs would want to kill and mount us. Hormone. What do you call that feeling when you own two fingers or feeling each other? Sudden growth makes a powerful impression, but its half-life is living under an assumed name beside the heat from a gas station hot dog. No matter how great an idea begins to appear, it is always torn apart by the crowd and fed to birds who've known no other life than the owl-decoyed ledgers of this guttered city. The simplest form of power is derived from a person's own body. Weight pressing downward. Sit on your hands and they'll feel you. The cleanse. Activated charcoal and a raw egg. The cleanse was the longest she'd ever tried, and it left her feeling weak and irritable. There was work to be done before the end of summer, so she hired a student from the list down at the employment office. He had his own car, a rust bucket it turned out, but it was enough to get him out of the city and into the woods where she lived, tucked away on a rural road dotted with upscale homes and shot-up mailboxes. She hired him because she wanted someone who wouldn't enter her house. He arrived in the morning, ate his lunch in the forest, and was gone again by the late afternoon. The stench of poorly combusted exhaust necklaced her driveway as he roared off. Everything happened outside. Instructions were issued through a crack in the door, her eyes peering out of the darkness like nostrils. When it came to hygiene, she assumed the worst. Deep in the woods, it was clear. The clusters were fixing their nitrogen. In the absence of soap, the cleanse recommended washing with ashes. She sent him in with a wheelbarrow borrowed from neighbors to rake the forest down to its coals. No more deadfall littering itself. Each load was dumped in the ravine. The metals in their magnets made her dizzy. They were seeding clouds now, with barium, she'd read. She could taste the pesticides in her food, very faint and high-pitched, but they were there, like a mood afflicting salivary nipples with rain sticks. Saliva, she knew, was her blood, filtered out of cells. All day long it went on pooling just behind the bottom of her front teeth. She wanted him to dig a grave for her elderly dog. She had been a breeder, and quitting the business meant waiting out the fading livery of her celebratory stock. The pet cemetery was strewn in a far corner of the yard like a ripped-up coat of arms. He dug a plot while the last one living played around his legs. As summer wore on, the dog refused to die. Every morning, stiff but eager, it rose to meet him, observing the progress of his raking from blackened patches of earth. It sat there, a loaf of pure bread. head with crossed paws. Eventually she threaded a bedsheet through the window for him to cover the plot. Weeds sprung from the mounted dirt. It made her uncomfortable to think of her insides. Small things can be blown out of proportion. A cleanse was a house swept clean with a stool loosened by a body committed to water. Expulsions have always taken the form of rivers, or boats on rivers, tipped over a height of land raised on masts of impoverished thought. Get the hell out. Wipe down the counters and walls. Roll up the carpets and beat them. Her family fled Poland during the war. To check on his progress, she would stand on the sunburnt deck and tell him about her childhood in Mile End. She lived down the street from Mordecai Rischler. Morty, she said the kids called him, and watched slices of dark cake slide from the edge of her yard. When it rained, he got wet. When it was hot, he got wet. Her house was a kidney. Whatever came in waited off balance in the hallways and bedrooms stacked in taxonomical distress. Newspapers and milk jugs grew brittle in the chap-lipped light of incurable stairwells. From the brick yard, he could see her sunroom buckling with blistered garbage bags. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the neighbor had said to him after he asked to borrow the wheelbarrow, you seen the inside? By the end of August, the cleanse had left her unsteady, and she stumbled, trying to change a light bulb in the front hall. He wrapped her arm using ice from his lunch cooler. She had let him in through the front door, and from there he took in the intestinal diversity of intractable remainders, the sentimental detachments, the spore-forming units. He changed a few other bulbs by standing on a pile of phone books from formerly unmerged municipalities. She wanted to keep the burnt-out ones, but he carried them to his car. Later that fall, she wrote him a letter. The dog was still alive, and the light bulbs were working. Her arm could extend to its full length. She'd kept the ice he had given her. It was waiting in the freezer, having assumed the shape of its bag. Hormone. The crowd reasons like a fatty acid by eating the heart of a courageous foe. Bravery may be acquired. Because transparent pieces of ice melt in the mouth, so too must panes of glass. A bromide. The umbrella is the starting point for a larger obfuscation. A constant mist of tiny particles rains upward, like neck hair at the cicada sex of a smoke alarm. Children outgrow the behaviors of cats, but for many years they are derelicts of skin flakes, stair runners, and upholstery. The average carpet smokes 3 packs a day. The glassy bits scratching your throat are leftover deterrents to predators. Dust is a conversation happening just out of earshot. It's the street talk of the endocrine and Alderan systems, a vector for the invectives of misdirection. Dust is a bunch of nickels your uncle gives you to get him another Goldschlager. My thoughts, like every other coagulation cascade, are made of melted lint and move around with the chirality of lost oven mitts. In the dusty barns of Michigan, the wrong bag of pale grit was mixed into cow feed. 9 million people ate Fire Master. My limbs tingle, just out of broadcast range. Here comes the industry standards to burn down the roofs of our mouths. I developed blisters from walking, but I devised ways to deal with them, which included wax, tape, and music. I realized that when I walk, my right foot makes a slight twist at the end of my stride. Usually after about 8 to 10 kilometers, depending on the monotony of the terrain. I could expect a blister to form on the outside of my little toe and then spread to each toe on my right foot. Soon it would be general, all over the dark central plane of my foot, on the treeless hills. Parts per billion. We want revolution, but it's raining, and Clayton has his sweatshirt on, the one with thumb holes burnt through the cuffs. Our high-schooled commitment is diluted by aerosolized anthems, squelching from wet leaves and rotten stumps at the edge of his parents' farm. I can tell, by the points of his thumbs, he's not really into this. It barely burned when I lit it. More of a shrugged smolder. More like watching your parents have sex. Not explosive revolt, but the sudden, sodden commitment to an obvious and pedestrian crossing. I have what's left of the thing, jammed down my boot when his mother appears. She's driving me home. You know, that's really offensive, she says. Her face stiffens in the maxed-out defog as we pass the conveyor belt factory at the edge of town. You shouldn't burn flags. She's trying hard not to look at me, and I feel the cauterized nylon edges against my sock, the thin plastic souvenir pole pressed to my ankle. She thinks there's something wrong with me, but can't say it. We pass the car dealership with its checkered pennants and sodium lights. It's the year-end burnout. The rain has ignited into snow. Hormone. A body is a crowd getting out of bed. It feels and enjoys itself through the genitals, nose, inner thigh, belly button, nipples, curled toes, small of the back, lips, scalp, earlobe, nape of the neck, and backs of the knees in a circular motion. With its chemicals, it can never be lonely. The women favored the smell of shirts from men whose immune systems were most different from their own. I arrived at the gate panting. My connection from Philadelphia to Montreal hadn't left yet, so there I was, sweat trickling down the small of my back. Flight announcements crested over the fatigued lounge like drowned duck rabbits. She appeared beside me, weaving slightly back and forth. "Hi there." Faint red wine stains continued to smile at the corners of her lips. Several canceled flights had meant a 5-hour delay and 5 more doubles at the bar. She asked why I was going to Montreal, and I told her it was to read poetry. "I like tall men." She stared at me, and I looked for something to look at just as the boarding announcements coughed to life. "Fuck it, I'm getting on that plane as soon as they open the goddamn door," she said as she pushed ahead of the businessmen with their interlocking brickwork carry-on. I eventually found her sitting one row behind me. The seat beside me was empty, and I could tell from her glance that she would claim it in a heartbeat once the aisle became free. A large apple-shaped man finally sat down. His oversized presence made any seat adjustments, including my own, out of the question. I was trapped. She was sitting in the exit row beside a wary, willowy young Quebecois, whom she accosted with broken but unself-conscious French. The flight attendant came by to verify the fitness of the exit row passengers. I was certain they would move her. She was obviously drunk, and would, in the event of an emergency, undoubtedly prove a catalyst for confusion. Despite several unsuccessful attempts at her attention, the bored flight attendant decided she was fit, and moved on to some downstream arguments about the overhead bins. This was when the notes started to appear, barely legible on a folded boarding pass into the crook of my arm. Poet, I seriously need it. Will you join the Mile High Club with me? I had never been propositioned this way before. I thought about my body, and the sweat still moistening my back. I thought about what it feels like to look at yourself from the outside, from, say, an airplane, peering down on farmland during shoulder season, headwaters visible all the way to their alluvial fans. I only understand kilometers, I wrote back. She implored again, and I declined with the excuse that the bathrooms were too small for a man like me. After the flight hit cruising altitude, she crept up behind me and whispered in my ear, "You better be there in 10 minutes. Don't be a pussy." I felt heavy in my seat, pressed against the oversized apple body of my neighbor, who pretended to notice none of this. There she was, waiting for me in the bathroom of a regional Bombardier Canadian jet somewhere over the Adirondack Mountains. After 10 minutes, after 20, she came back and pulled open the collar of my shirt. She threw a note against my chest. It said, in surprisingly clear handwriting, with a small heart dotting the I, "You make me sick." Hormone. Us on that boat. US on that boat. Money aside for the journey by boat. The boat was crowded. Got on a boat and came here. I was crying inside that boat. We thought they were fishermen, but it was a boat. My boat was a dinghy. Nobody on the boat expected the water. I took a boat to Italy. They pushed us on the boat. Our lives in that tiny boat. On the boat. By boat. A boat. I stopped breathing. Every time we think of that boat. Inter-kingdom signaling. A few months ago, a small survivalist militia set up camp in my airways. They were friends of a family friend, no big deal. They seemed like a tight group and were fond of sharing feverish postulates about the Superdome and herd immunity. We ate together, drank together, but mostly they kept to themselves and their own routines in a harmless slick equipped with small watchtowers and channels to exchange nutrients. I didn't feel a thing. Then sometime in February I was getting run down, pulled in too many directions. Standard midwinter shit. This must have spooked them. I was up late one night with a slight chill when abruptly they turned on me, fleeing the nasal passages, planting false flags in my bloodstream. They split up and tried different routes to safety, desperate to escape their doomed host. Some got stuck in my lungs and middle ear, taking momentary refuge under the forest covered of cilia. Their panic became a dispersed virulence that provoked inflammatory denunciations of the body parts they fled. White blood cells were forced to improvise my periphery. I coughed up more phlegm than any awakened interest in the experiences of others should reasonably permit. There I was, shot up on the inside by some patriots, quitting their colonies for the quixotic promise of a cellular pastoral. During the migratory phase of self-interest, everything looks ballistic. I, for one, refuse to believe that someone at the very top didn't know about this. The urge to defecate commonly occurs to people browsing in a bookstore. The Mariko Akoi phenomenon, as it is called, afflicts me when I look at maps. The exquisite network of rivers in a drainage basin, 1 to 50,000 scale. I drew maps of my walks, their discharge. Hormone. It's really pathetic. Fallacy of the bearded climate. Change is going to come to the car-washed air masses. Fire all bullets directly into hurricanes. Outcries tempo humidity. Symbol stands crash with the market. Sequence is the great orderer and destroyer. Sequence has made mountains with campaigns of sand and raised the obscure cell to the presidency. It's the Baroque staircase to bread that fogs blood. Insulin like the Wolffian and Mullerian ducts waits for signatures on each colonnade. Which part of me was speaking this rash? Which part was shouting directions above the hapless haploids confused by the weather? My greatest work of art is heat. Pack your bags. We cannot save snow. Snow can't be saved. No amount of intervention or therapy in the groups of anonymous Christian soldiers will work. Sacrifice won't keep it from dying in its place. Snowflake by snowflake, it can't be steered away from ruin. If caught in an open palm and brought forth as evidence, it is done. If breathed on, it's done. There's no coming back after falling into rivers. Storms made of snow appear in the streets like insurrections lit by moths, or milkweed, or the cephalization of sympathetic distress. The possibility for transformation is real. The long-awaited overthrow is here. And just like that, it is gone. There is no other world. Wear a dark coat to see snow on your sleeve, fugitively, phantasmagorically before it goes. Even now it is stained red by the carotenoid pigment of a cryophilic algae. It falls orange on Korea with dust from the deserts of China. It has turned yellow in the Ural Mountains with high concentrations of manganese and chrome. It is black and greasy to the touch from smokestacks of the Ohio and Rhine. Eat it by the handful, and it enters you, to be imprisoned in your cells, put to work in the ovens of your metabolism. Snow can't be saved. We cannot save snow. Hormone. When I put food in my mouth, I am taking dictation. I am reading as I lick the glue on the envelope that holds the letter I have written about how you taste me. Small nipples, carpet tongues, and soft palates, the cheek and upper esophagus. Receptors line creases in the lungs sensitive to the tripwire taste of infection. An enzyme appears on sour-sensing cells for the exclusive purpose of deciphering bubbles in a glass of beer. In Mexico, as an act of humble devotion, a sect of Capuchin nuns wore a groove into the floor by licking the length of a courtyard with their tongues. There is a religion of the cortex dedicated to the flavor of water warmed by the sun. Spectrum. The sunburn occupies a complex cultural, biological, and medical position. Widespread social interest in tanning and the therapeutic effects of the sun have historically waxed and waned. Sun exposure is a major risk factor for skin cancer. However, it has also been associated with strengthened bones, reduced risk of heart disease, and reduced risk of other cancers. It has been used as a treatment for various autoimmune illnesses. In addition to being necessary for the production of vitamin D, sunlight also makes us feel good. It triggers the release of serotonin and endogens, opioids such as endorphins. Despite mutagenic effects, ultraviolet light is an important component of general health in ways that are still being understood. Sunlight is the only carcinogen we require to keep us alive. The sunburn can be read as a message from the stars, our star, written into, at least temporarily, the kinked staircase of our genes. What does it say about the complicated matter of thresholds, about too much and not enough, about science and pseudoscience, about this world and the cosmos beyond? The capitalist Anthropocene has enabled industrial practices that have damaged the ozone layer and led to increased ultraviolet light penetration. These anthropogenic effects have augmented the sun's message. Similarly, the proliferation of sunscreens has posed other potential problems. There is evidence that the parabens commonly used as preservatives in sunscreens are hormone-mimicking, endocrine-disrupting chemicals. Parabens have been found to be associated with some melanomas. What if sunburns were trying to tell us something? What might they be a message from? The sun can kill you. I am radiantly happy. The people around me squint in the blaze. I feel this way even as cutaneous pigments empurple small bonfires around which carnivorous communiques edit my bearings. The line between tonic and poison is the line between tonic and gin. Cancer is always a risk of reading too deeply. Though my head, and through it, the sun wanders with its surrogate ashtrays, suddenly ermine among bloom-freighted cocktails eyelashing the dermal contiguity of vaulted esteem. In times of pleasure, we must decide again and again how to undress our blisters. A room is always brightest under its shades. Vitamin D. Addle-headed, condiddled, dadded, daddled, dead-headed, dendrodendritic, diddered, diddled, disbudded, disgauded, disindividualized, dotted, doddered, dog-sledded, dunder-headed, granddaddy, lepidodendroid, muddle-headedly, ski-daddled, underbudded, wood-shedded. Meat sweats. It was cloudy, but I burned anyway. A binary message dripped down my back. Like a city that is otherwise a victim of its rivers, my sweat smells the way it does because of the creatures that live in it. Out of the heat, my shirt dries white with salt. I have about 3 shakers full inside of me right now. On the skin where the burn glistens, there's a microbe shaped like a club that sends its own messages to the outside world from within, a reflective pool of perspiration. Found in pig saliva and in the fruiting bodies of truffles, this chemical signal can influence how much someone likes my haircut, smile, or the unconscious habit I have of slightly revealing the tip of my tongue. With warm shoulders still full of obscured daylight, the beacons continue well into the night, microbes alive at the poolside switch. I am a city whose roads are merely widened trails, cut by creatures looking for salt. I hope you are feeling better. By the time it appears, it has already happened. Dali's lobster is a boiled telephone. Napoleon goes to St. Helena. The sun never sets on the British Empire, so the whole thing burns to a crisp. At some point, aspiration owes its origins to recumbency, just as pigments don't always come from ink, but also shadows lying on the page. Warmth and dizziness are red flags raised on a moon whose real portents are footprints. Affectation for refrigerants is incremental. Opioids pool among the lesser lengths of a psychic center, peeled the way an apple is fully grasped by being eaten. The lights stay on all night and no one sleeps. The stairs are swept, thymine to thymine, uracil to uracil. The sun doesn't oblige us to do anything, only something. All the stems await their cells. Hormone. We can take this park by the gut flora. We can take this park tonight. Our shit is the compressed sum of all the evidence against us. We can also take this park another night. It stinks and cries to heaven. Not everyone may be ready tonight. We get rid of it alone in separate rooms. Each person has to make their own autonomous decision. It is clear we are ashamed of it. No one can decide for you. You have to decide for yourself. Our real glory derives from our grip. Everyone is an autonomous individual. Everyone is an autonomous individual. Independent variables. Next to the off-leash area after dark, a man struggles to release a dog from his car. A few snowflakes avoid themselves while falling. He's at the open door, fevering his weight. There is fur spilling over the steering wheel, jumping at his mouth, but there is no dog. A woman's head rises and falls, her hair mixing with the man's hand. Her bra visible against her bare back. He moves in and out of her, and the snow moves in and out of the car, goose bumping her shoulder blades. They move together, changing planes in the endorphin airports that concourse through their bodies, that guided them to the edge of this park in the first place, and left the map-reading light lit to bathe them in the sepia mesh of historical arrival. Looking inside my body has done something to my body. This park and its no dumping signs are reproduced in cities that reproduce on the edges of larger cities, like galvanic corrosion. It is not possible to separate the form of desire from its material substrate. The engines rev and the redistributed world burns. It makes perfect sense to fuck here. I appear suddenly walking my dog as pointlessly corrected grammar in the bootlegged snow, a dirty sentence diagrammed by the dial tone of the keys still in the ignition. Our eyes lock as I pass. Beyond the parking lot, I pick up after my dog. Through the thin plastic bag, I hold her shit and feel the temperature of the inside of her body. My pee comes out with such contrasting heat that it fogs my thinking. I'm an individual for the purposes of involuntary valves. What gives a company the right to its teeming instructions? I am letter-headed. I tried to have the animal mounted in a pose that I remembered it being in before it decided to end its life. In the throes of digestion, the small intestine spreads out to cover twice the area of Central Park, or the length of 10,000 footsteps. We envelop what we eat, like bacteria, like flame retardants, like a people who after some time together are shared by the same desires. Here is my body, and everything in it. Let the aliens take me to their mothership piece by piece. Hormone. You've been a difficult crowd, but you've been my crowd. And when you leave, my blood cooling like a ruled-out thought, the elaborate fiction of my immune system convincing no one, broken camps, leaching nitrogen and potassium, fungicides and uranium from my last dressed shadow, you won't look back. The nucleus of terms has split. All messages are homeless before they're received. Even the ones we leave for ourselves.